Yeah, so Renee shared, we have these videos that we're sharing with you that you can maybe tell we're part of kind of a news story that we had the opportunity to participate in that wanted to kind of share more about the program. So we have those clips from those sort of journalistic interviews, but we also want you to know that we've been trying to explore this from a research standpoint as well, and to kind of further inform what's going on as far as our more kind of theoretical understanding of the social experience of girls with autism, which is meaningful and impactful to us as people who are trying to develop programming that's responsive to that need and that profile, and then that we think also helps sort of move the bar forward as far as, you know, what we've talked about as practitioners and people within the community and beyond, and broader society having a better understanding of these experiences. So the way that we approached exploring this was through a focus group methodology, where we had 4 different types of groups, so and 4 different types of kind of participant categories. So we had adolescent girls, some girls who had an autism diagnosis, and the other group of girls who did not, and then parents of the girls of each of those groups. And we talked to each group, each kind of category of participants in separate groups, but each group was made up of anywhere from 2 or 3 to 6 or 7 participants. So, and we asked them a series of questions that were kind of led by these guiding research questions. So asking about, you know, better understanding interests and social activities and how those are similar or different amongst those groups. Kind of what are the components of and roles within friendships as described by, these girls and their families, and how does kind of social presentation or kind of self-care routines and perceptions of those routines differ in girls with or without autism. And we wanted to have kind of a model that was informed from kind of multiple dimensions. So again, hearing both from girls and their parents, and kind of how that interaction affects that profile as well. So we have just a sampling of some of the themes that I think kind of tie into this idea of the secondary impact and how that's affecting girls and women. And there are other elements to this model, certainly, but these are kind of the ones we wanted to highlight for our conversation today. One of them being this sort of limited opportunities for get-togethers and networking, and then even sometimes within those settings, fewer interactions that are happening among people. I should back up and say too, we did ask these questions about how does that look now, and how did that look when you were in elementary school and when your daughter was younger? How has that perhaps changed over time? And so one of the things that we heard some parents talking about of an autistic daughter, what they shared was, for our daughter, it was that she might have had some friends when she was younger, but as she got older, she's kind of having less and less of these connections. And we sort of wondered, why is this happening? How is this occurring? And one of the themes that we noticed was this shift in how activities are planned and coordinated, right? So what we heard from girls and parents in all groups was that there is this kind of shift from parents being involved in coordinating and planning at the younger ages, and as girls are getting older, there's a shift to girls within the peer groups kind of making more of those plans on their own. And even our girls without autism, we're talking about how there's this vicious cycle where you want to kind of get in on group activities, and when you attend those activities, you're not just doing something here in that setting, but you're also making plans for the next time that you go. And so if you feel like there was this anxiety that was expressed that if you miss one event, you're missing out on really what might happen next and what might happen after that, because that's where this kind of cycle of planning and coordination happens. And those girls, the girls without autism, were talking about kind of taking that on themselves. Whereas when we talked with some of our participants with autism, they really were still talking about, as teenagers, their parents still helping coordinate those activities to an extent that seemed more than some of their peers. And parents talked about, she has this desire, but she's sort of asking me for support and helping to make those plans happen. And then a third theme that we recognized with this idea of the increased complexity that's happening, that, as you're getting older and getting into adolescence, many things are more complicated, and along with that, so go your social relationships, the interactions, the rules, all of those things get more, get to be more to manage. And so that's something that our participants acknowledged going on as well. So those were kind of some key themes and takeaways that I think really relate to what we're talking about as far as wanting to build more of those opportunities, provide some supports around planning and coordination, and helping make some of that complexity perhaps more clear and easier to manage.
And you leave it on that one. And we heard about the shift to fewer opportunities, fewer friendships, and that coincides with this increased complexity in adolescence, right? And so it's getting more difficult, and just as it's getting more difficult, then you have less support that's going to be involved, because it's not as, it's not as likely that other girls' parents are in on the coordination, or other girls' parents are in on those interactions. And so I think that is what's one of the things that's starting to widen that gap even more. And so to hear from the individuals with autism talk about, not having as many opportunities or interactions, a lot of that had to do with the types of activities they were into. They talked about more structured groups, Girl Scouts, things like that, and that those were the primary ways that they had interactions, and those things were decreasing, and so they didn't have as many places to make plans. We heard from girls then that talked about we asked, how do you keep up with friends, or how do you make friends? How do you go about doing that? And a lot of them talked about talking to people in school, and that they didn't see their friends as much in their classes once they started getting older. And then a lot of our girls too are in different types, started to be in these different types of classes, and that's when we see the fewer opportunities for them to interact with other girls their age. And another theme that I thought we had a quote, but I don't see it right now, but a theme that stood out was hearing from the girls without autism talked about meeting friends through friends, so friends of friends. And so highlighting again that important of having that network or available people around for you to interact with, and to potentially build that social network or circle, or find someone that you're going to relate to. So they talked a lot about this, planning at events, planning the next event and where you're at, and the friend to friend. So really making those limited interactions kind of critical. We want to use this information to inform, our work in our program, but to lessen that gap, to start to address, well, what is it that we need to do then to anticipate what these girls need in order to be, in on those interactions with other people, or using the same type of coordination methods, but also then to lessen this impact on their social emotional health. We published a study a couple years ago where we were just looking at some of those same concepts that we look at in GNO. We look at social competence, and similar to what we would expect, this bottom graph here shows this is your self-perception, and individuals with autism being the dotted line, individuals with autism or without autism being the solid line, and higher scores means you have higher or more positive self-perception, and you can see the size of that gap going across there to show that our girls with autism were not feeling as confident about who they were and their self-worth. And then the top graph there shows those first, four scales there are the social skills about cooperation and communication. Higher scores on those measures are more competent in that area. So you can see that same gap there where girls without autism felt much more competent. But then I think most telling is that large dip in between the internalizing and the externalizing there, that again, these girls are having a lot more symptoms. Marjorie Solomon's work looks at that too, and she actually looks at girls with and without autism and boys with and without autism, and girls with autism have the highest risk, or demonstrate the most anxiety and depression symptoms in adolescence in the group that she was looking at. So we want to revisit the implications for that secondary impact that we were talking about. Obviously, the ascertainment bias, and we're individuals who are included in those samples and how that informs measurement and diagnosis. And we talked a little bit about the generalizability then of the interventions that we have, or even the available programs that are being constructed for girls and women with autism are much fewer, because if you think about the consumer need out there, right, it's driven by this population or these consumers that are primarily male. We talked about a smaller pool, fewer interactions with other girls, similar age, driven by programming, driven by your school setting, and then that sort of friend, gap in how you go about planning your activities. We talked yesterday, or not yesterday, I guess, but then also this morning, it seemed like yesterday, I guess, about those gender nuance skills and how we see, we talked about the double whammy, right, and how there's greater complexity for adolescent females, even compared to adolescent males, and how having autism would, could make that even kind of a greater burden there, and which we think might help explain this exacerbated social, difficulties, or these social emotional anxiety and depression types of symptoms. So thinking about the prevalence, not just in, what do girls and women look like and compared to males, and yes, we have fewer of these people and why, but what is the impact of, with the existing prevalence that we have on the kind of the overall health and quality of life of these girls and young women.